fascinates me about masters,
What's that?
how often they talk about being beginners. I was rereading Suzuki Roshi this week, and there's this line that just stopped me cold.
Oh, from Zen mind, beginner's mind?
That's the one. He writes, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few."
That's such a deceptively simple statement.
Isn't it? And the more I sat with it, the more I realized he's not just being humble or poetic. He's describing something about consciousness itself.
Welcome to Abba Memorabile, everyone. I'm Drake.
And I'm Holly. For those just joining us, Abba Memorabile means from time beyond memory. We explore wisdom traditions and how they speak to modern seekers.
And today, Holly's going to take us deep into something that sounds paradoxical. The idea that expertise might actually be a barrier to learning.
Right? That what you know might be preventing you from knowing more. Shoshin. Beginner's mind.
And there's something personal in this for you, isn't there?
There is, because I've been on both sides of it. I've experienced that beautiful openness of approaching something for the first time. And I've caught myself in that expert's trap where I think I already understand, so I stop actually seeing.
Let's explore that.
So let me tell you about Shunryu Suzuki, because the context of his teaching matters enormously.
He came to San Francisco in 1959, right?
Right, he was 55 years old, a Zen priest who'd trained for decades in Japan. Traditional temples, rigorous practice, the whole traditional path. And he arrives in America expecting to establish a temple for Japanese immigrants.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. What happened was that American students started showing up. Young people with no background in Buddhism, no understanding of Japanese culture, no formal training in anything, just genuine curiosity.
And here's what fascinates me. By all traditional measures, these students should have been terrible.
Exactly. They didn't know the forms. They couldn't sit properly. They didn't understand the language or the cultural context. From a traditional Japanese perspective, they were hopeless beginners.
But Suzuki Roshi found something remarkable in them.
He found that their very ignorance was an advantage. They hadn't learned what was supposed to happen. They hadn't accumulated preconceptions about what Zen was or wasn't. They came with genuine questions rather than rehearsed answers.
Whereas his Japanese students
Had often become, as he put it, experts in Zen. They knew the terminology. They could perform the rituals perfectly. They'd studied for years. But somewhere along the way, many of them had lost the very thing they were seeking.
the openness, the not knowing,
The willingness to be surprised. And this became the central teaching of his career in America. That beginner's mind isn't just a nice starting point. It's the goal. It's what you're trying to maintain or recover throughout your entire practice.
that's almost counterintuitive. Most people think the goal is to become an expert.
Exactly, and that's the trap. The subtle trick that Suzuki identified. You set out to learn, and the learning itself becomes the obstacle. Not because knowledge is bad, but because the knower starts to think they've arrived somewhere.
Talk about the actual experience of beginner's mind. What does it feel like?
Oh, this is where it gets interesting. Think about the last time you encountered something genuinely new. Not new information about something you already understood, but a completely novel experience. Maybe a practice you'd never tried, a way of moving you'd never moved, a kind of music you'd never heard.
That fresh encounter.
Right, in that moment, your mind doesn't have categories for what's happening. It can't immediately slot the experience into existing boxes. So it does something extraordinary. It actually pays attention.
Full attention.
Full attention, your senses sharpen, your assumptions relax. You're not thinking about what this is supposed to be or comparing it to something else. You're just there with it, experiencing it directly.
And that state has a particular quality to it.
It does. There's an openness, a kind of receptivity that we lose once we think we understand something. Suzuki Roshi called it emptiness, but not in a nihilistic sense. Emptiness as an empty of preconceptions, ready to receive.
Now, here's what strikes me about this. It sounds lovely in theory, but expertise is genuinely valuable. We need people who know things.
Absolutely. And this is where I think Suzuki's teaching gets misunderstood. He's not saying expertise is bad or that knowledge is the enemy. He's pointing at something more subtle.
Which is?
The relationship between what we know and what we can perceive. There's actual research on this. It's called the curse of knowledge.
Oh, the studies on teaching?
Yes. So there's this famous experiment where people are asked to tap out a melody on a table. Just tap the rhythm with their fingers. Then they're asked to estimate how many listeners will recognize the song.
And they wildly overestimate.
They predict about 50%. The actual number is around 3%. And the reason is fascinating. When you're tapping, you hear the melody in your head. It seems obvious to you what song it is, but the listener only hears random tapping.
Because they don't have the internal soundtrack.
Exactly. And this isn't just a quirk about music, it extends to everything. Once you know something deeply, you cannot accurately remember what it was like to not know it. Your expertise becomes a kind of blindness to the experience of ignorance.
Which has massive implications for teaching.
Enormous implications. This is why experts are often terrible teachers. Not because they don't care or aren't intelligent, but because they literally cannot perceive what's confusing about the material. They've lost access to beginners' confusion.
And it extends beyond teaching too.
Into every area where expertise might become limitation. Problem solving, for instance. There's a concept called functional fixedness. Once you know what a tool is for, you have difficulty seeing its other potential uses.
The hammer only looks like a hammer.
Right. Whereas a child who's never seen a hammer might use it as a drum, a lever, a paperweight, a doorstop. Their ignorance is genuinely useful because they haven't learned to see the object through the narrow lens of its intended function.
So there's a real cognitive mechanism behind beginner's mind. It's not just poetic language.
Not at all, and the neuroscience is fascinating here too. Children's brains are remarkably plastic. They form new neural connections easily because they haven't yet developed the efficient but constraining pathways that adult brains rely on.
That's why children learn languages so much faster.
Exactly. An adult learning a language is constantly filtering new sounds through existing categories. We hear foreign phonemes and immediately try to match them to sounds we already know. But a child's brain hasn't built those categorical filters yet. They can actually hear distinctions that adult ears have literally lost the ability to perceive.
That's sobering.
It should be, because it suggests that some of what we call learning is actually a process of narrowing. We gain expertise by developing efficient patterns. But those patterns then prevent us from seeing what doesn't fit.
So how do we recover it? Is adult beginner's mind even possible?
This is the crucial question. And different traditions have different approaches. In Zen, the emphasis is on zazen, sitting meditation. Not meditation aimed at achieving something, but just sitting, returning again and again to this moment without expectations.
The practice of not seeking.
Right. Suzuki Roshi would say things like, when you cook rice, just cook rice. Not as a technique for mindfulness, but as a practice of releasing the expert's compulsion to turn everything into something else, something meaningful, something productive.
Just this.
Just this. And there's something similar in the Japanese concept of ichigo ichie. It literally means one time, one meeting. The idea that every encounter is unique and will never occur again.
So you approach each moment as if it's both the first and the last.
Exactly. In tea ceremony, which is where this phrase originates, every gathering is treated as utterly singular. Even if you've performed the same ceremony thousands of times, even if you're meeting the same people, this particular meeting is unrepeatable. This awareness transforms how you're present to it. And
It's like the ceremony is always new.
always new because you're always new. The you sitting down for tea this morning is not the same you who sat yesterday. The conditions are different. The light is different. Your body is different. If you truly perceive this, then nothing is ever routine.
But our minds desperately want things to be routine.
They do. And there's good reason for that. Routines are efficient. If we had to approach every familiar situation as if it were completely novel, we'd be exhausted. Our brains create shortcuts precisely because they're useful.
So the goal isn't to eliminate expertise.
No, the goal is something more nuanced. It's developing the ability to toggle between expert efficiency and beginner's openness, to know when categories are serving you and when they're blinding you.
That sounds like a skill in itself.
It is, and I think this is where Socrates becomes relevant, actually.
Oh, the I know that I know nothing?
Yes, but there's more to it than that famous line suggests. Socrates wasn't being modest or ironic. He was describing an actual practice of inquiry. His method involved relentlessly questioning what people claimed to know until the foundations gave way.
The Elenius.
Right. And what usually happened was that people discovered their knowledge wasn't as solid as they thought. They believed they understood justice or virtue or courage. But when pressed, they couldn't actually articulate what they meant.
Their expertise was an illusion.
Often, yes. And Socrates saw this as valuable, not humiliation, but liberation. Because once you realize you don't actually know what you thought you knew, you're back in the position of genuine inquiry. You can begin again.
Beginner's mind through philosophical demolition.
That's one way to put it. And the medieval mystics had a similar concept, docta ignorantia, learned ignorance. The idea that true wisdom involves learning how much you don't know.
That's Nicholas of Cusa.
Yes, 15th century, he argued that approaching the infinite, approaching the divine, required acknowledging the radical inadequacy of all our concepts. Any idea of God is necessarily not God, because the infinite can't be contained in finite concepts.
So the more you learn, the more you should recognize your ignorance.
Exactly, and this appears across so many traditions. The Sufi concept of fana, dying before death, letting your accumulated self dissolve so something fresh can emerge, the Christian instruction to become like children, the Taoist return to Pu, the uncarved block, simplicity before all the cultural conditioning.
These are all pointing at the same thing from different angles.
I think so. There's something about consciousness that naturally calcifies. We accumulate identity, opinions, certainties. And that accumulation, while useful, also weighs us down. These traditions are all offering methods for periodic unburdening.
I want to stay with the Taoist angle for a moment, because I think it adds something different.
Please go ahead.
So when Laozi talks about returning to the uncarved block, he's not just talking about intellectual humility. There's something about returning to a state before differentiation itself, before the categories that divide experience into this and that.
The simplicity before complexity.
Right. And the Taoist sages use the image of water for a reason. Water doesn't have a fixed form. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. It finds the lowest places without effort. It's soft, but wears away stone.
So, beginner's mind as fluidity rather than emptiness.
Yes, exactly. Not a vacancy, but an adaptability. The expert is rigid, fixed in their patterns. The beginner is fluid, able to respond to what's actually happening rather than what's supposed to happen.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it connects to what you find in martial arts traditions too, the idea that the master moves like water, responding instantly to whatever the opponent offers, because they're not attached to any particular technique.
Bruce Lee talked about this.
Be water, my friend. But he was drawing on centuries of Chinese martial philosophy. The idea that true mastery involves transcending mastery, becoming formless after learning all the forms.
Which brings us back to the paradox we keep circling. You have to become an expert before you can transcend expertise.
That's the uncomfortable truth. There's no shortcut. You can't skip to beginner's mind without first developing something to let go of. The unlearning requires prior learning. The emptying requires prior filling.
Let's talk about how this actually works in practice. Because I think some listeners might be thinking, great, beginner's mind sounds wonderful, but I can't just forget what I know.
No, you can't, and you shouldn't try. The practice isn't about erasing knowledge. It's about changing your relationship to it.
How so?
So, here's an experiment anyone can try. Take something you consider yourself expert in. It could be your profession, a hobby, a subject you've studied for years. Now imagine you're encountering it for the very first time. What questions would you ask?
Interesting.
Most people find they can't easily do this. Their expertise immediately jumps in with answers before the questions even form. But with practice, you can develop a kind of mental bracketing. You temporarily set aside what you know in order to see what's actually there.
Like phenomenological reduction.
Exactly like that. Husserl called it epoche, suspending the natural attitude to examine experience directly. And I think this connects to why certain practices are so powerful for cultivating beginner's mind.
What kinds of practices?
Movement practices, especially. Because the body can't pretend. If you take up a new physical discipline, your body is genuinely a beginner, regardless of what your mind thinks. You can't expertise your way through clumsy coordination.
So the body teaches humility.
It does, and that physical humility can bleed into other areas. You start recognizing the feeling of genuine not knowing in your body, and then you can start noticing when you're in that state mentally too.
What about in professional contexts? I'm thinking of someone who's been in their field for 20 years.
This is where it gets practically important, because the curse of knowledge is devastating in professional contexts. Experts fail to communicate with non-experts. Organizations become blind to disruption from outside the industry. Specialists can't collaborate across disciplines because everyone thinks their frame is the right one.
So beginner's mind has business applications.
Real ones. There's a whole literature now about how innovation often comes from outsiders. People who don't know what's supposed to be impossible try it anyway and succeed. The Dunning-Kruger effect gets a lot of attention for showing how incompetent people overestimate their abilities. But the flip side is just as important.
What's the flip side?
Very competent people underestimate what beginners can see. They dismiss novice questions as naive, without realizing those questions might be pointing at genuine blind spots. In healthy learning environments, the beginner's confusion is treated as valuable data rather than something to be quickly corrected.
And in unhealthy environments?
Beginners learn to hide their confusion. They mimic expert vocabulary before they understand expert thinking. They perform knowledge rather than genuinely develop it. And then they become experts who've never actually metabolized beginners' confusion, so they perpetuate the same dynamic.
It's a cycle.
A vicious one. And breaking it requires what Suzuki Roshi was trying to cultivate: a genuine appreciation for not knowing, a willingness to sit in confusion without immediately rushing to resolve it.
That takes a certain kind of courage.
It does, because not knowing feels vulnerable. We live in a culture that rewards certainty and punishes doubt. Admitting you don't understand something can feel like weakness, especially if you're supposed to be the expert.
But Suzuki is suggesting it's actually strength.
Yes, the beginner's vulnerability is paradoxically a position of power, because the beginner can actually learn. The expert who can't admit ignorance is stuck. They might have sophisticated defenses against recognizing their stuckness, but they're stuck nonetheless.
There's something here about the relationship between learning and identity too.
Oh, this is huge. So much of expertise becomes tied to who we think we are. I'm a musician. I'm a scientist. I'm someone who understands philosophy. And once knowledge becomes identity, it becomes very hard to question, because questioning the knowledge feels like questioning the self.
The ego gets involved.
Completely. And this is where the Zen approach is so radical, because Zen isn't just suggesting we hold our knowledge lightly, it's questioning whether there's a stable self to identify with knowledge in the first place.
No fixed self, no fixed knowledge.
Right. If you're constantly becoming, constantly changing, then yesterday's expertise isn't even yours in any meaningful sense. The you who knew it is already gone. This sounds abstract, but it has real practical implications.
What implications?
Freedom to start over, freedom to be terrible at something without it threatening your core identity, freedom to say, I don't know, without feeling diminished. If you're not trying to maintain some image of yourself as the expert, you can actually be present to what's happening now.
And that's when real learning occurs.
That's when real learning occurs, not as accumulation of more knowledge for the already full self, but as genuine transformation. The beginner doesn't add to what they already are, they become something new.
I want to bring in the body dimension more explicitly here, because I think there's a way this stays too cerebral otherwise.
Good point. So here's something I've noticed. When I'm in genuine beginner's mind, my body feels different. There's a quality of alertness, almost like an animal encountering something unfamiliar. Senses open, breathing changes, muscles are engaged but not tense.
Fight or flight.
Not quite. It's more like heightened receptivity. The body is ready to respond to whatever happens because it doesn't know what's coming. That's very different from the body of the expert, which is often slack or habitual because it knows nothing surprising will occur.
So beginner's mind has a somatic signature.
It does. And this can be cultivated. Practices that interrupt physical habits, that ask the body to do something it doesn't know how to do, they create opportunities for that somatic freshness. The mind follows.
Which is why movement practices are so powerful for this.
Exactly. You can't think your way into beginner's mind, but you can move into it. You can put your body in a situation where expertise genuinely doesn't apply and let the psychological openness follow the physical openness.
Are there dangers in this? Places where beginner's mind becomes an excuse for something else?
That's such an important question. Yes, absolutely. There's a shadow side to this teaching.
What's the shadow?
Using beginner's mind as a justification for avoiding the hard work of developing genuine competence. I have seen this in spiritual circles especially. Someone will say, I'm just staying in beginner's mind, when what they're really doing is refusing to be held accountable for their lack of understanding.
Spiritual bypassing.
A form of it? True beginner's mind isn't the same as willful ignorance. Suzuki Roshi trained intensively for decades. His beginner's mind was the result of deep practice, not a substitute for it. There's a difference between the freshness that comes from genuine openness and the vagueness that comes from never committing to anything.
So it's not about avoiding expertise.
Not at all. It's about how you hold expertise once you have it. Can you know a great deal and still approach each situation as if you might learn something? Can you have strong opinions that you're willing to question? Can you be the expert in the room and still listen to the beginner as if they might see something you've missed?
That's the integration.
That's the real practice. Not beginner's mind as a permanent state, but the capacity to access it when needed, to shift between knowing and not knowing, depending on what the situation requires.
Which brings us back to why this matters so much for transformation.
Yes, because here's what I've observed. People who are stuck, genuinely stuck in patterns they can't change, almost always share one quality. They think they understand their situation. They've diagnosed themselves. They know what the problem is and why it exists and what would fix it if only conditions were different.
But that understanding is part of what keeps them stuck.
Exactly. Their expert knowledge of their own problems becomes the prison. They can't see other possibilities because their categories are too fixed. And what often precipitates real change is precisely that moment when all that certainty cracks.
The moment of not knowing,
The moment when you realize, maybe I don't actually understand this, maybe everything I thought I knew about myself is up for question. That's terrifying, but it's also the opening, the crack where the light gets in.
so in that sense, beginner's mind isn't a luxury. It's a necessity for transformation.
I think so. If you already know who you are and how you work and what you're capable of, then you can only become more of what you already are. But if you can access genuine not knowing about yourself, genuine openness to being surprised by your own possibilities, then real change becomes available.
And this is cultivable?
It is. Through practice, through community, through the kinds of confrontations with the unfamiliar that loosen our grip on certainty. It's why so many traditions include practices that deliberately induce beginner's mind. Fasting, silence, pilgrimage, anything that disrupts the normal patterns and forces fresh engagement.
Every moment as the first moment.
Every moment as first moment, last moment, the absolute uniqueness of right now, which is the only time anything has ever actually happened.
Can we talk about the practical side a bit more? Because I think there's a tension here that people encounter
What tension?
between genuinely not knowing and being responsible. I mean, if a surgeon cultivates beginner's mind, I still want her to remember where to cut.
Such a good point, and I think this is where the teaching gets nuanced. Suzuki wasn't suggesting we abandon competence, he was pointing at something about how we hold competence.
The relationship rather than the substance.
Exactly. Your surgeon can know exactly where to cut, can have performed this operation hundreds of times, and still approach this particular patient with fresh eyes, because this patient is not the hundreds who came before. This body, this day, this situation is genuinely new.
So expertise provides the tools, but beginner's mind provides the attention.
That's beautifully put. The expertise is necessary but not sufficient. You also need the willingness to see what's actually in front of you, rather than what you expect to see based on past experience.
And this applies in so many contexts.
It does. Think about relationships, long-term relationships where people stop really seeing each other because they think they already know who the other person is. Oh, that's just how she is. He always does that. Those stories, which are based on real patterns, become blinders.
The expert on your partner stops actually perceiving them.
Stops being surprised by them, stops noticing when they're changing, growing, becoming something new. The fixed image replaces the living person.
So beginner's mind in relationship would be
Approaching the person you've known for decades as if you're meeting them for the first time, which sounds impossible, but actually it's just accurate because they have changed since yesterday. They are not exactly who they were. If you can perceive that, the relationship stays alive.
there's something here about freshness versus novelty too. Those aren't the same thing.
No, they're not. And I think modern culture confuses them. We seek novelty constantly, new experiences, new information, new stimulation. But novelty is just different content. Freshness is about how we engage with any content, new or familiar.
So you could have tremendous novelty and no freshness.
Constantly scrolling through new content without ever really being present to any of it. That's novelty without freshness. Or you could have no novelty at all, doing the same practice every day for years, but with genuine freshness each time.
Which is deeper.
The freshness, obviously. The Zen masters weren't seeking novel experiences. They were sitting zazen, walking, eating rice. The same activities, often in the same room, year after year. But with what attention? That's the question.
It reminds me of what you said earlier about movement practices.
Yes, and I want to go deeper into that because I think for modern people, the body is often where beginner's mind becomes most accessible. Our minds are so trained to expertise, so good at categorizing and knowing, but the body can still be genuinely humbled.
How so?
Try something physically new, something your body genuinely doesn't know how to do. It could be a martial art, a dance form, a movement practice you've never attempted. Notice what happens.
The humbling.
The beautiful humbling. Your body doesn't pretend. It doesn't have the ego defenses that the mind has. It can't fake competence. You know, when you don't know how to move, that's obvious and there's nothing to do but learn.
And that learning has a quality to it.
A precious quality, full engagement, attention, presence. The body is discovering something, and because it can't pretend to already know, it's fully engaged in the discovery. That engagement is what expertise often loses.
So, physical practices that maintain beginner's mind would be ones that keep presenting new challenges.
Or that keep revealing new depths in familiar movements. Both approaches work. Some practices are designed to constantly introduce novelty. Others take simple movements and refine them infinitely. So there's always something new to discover in what seems familiar.
Which approach is better?
I don't think it's about better. It's about temperament and what the person needs. Some people benefit from constantly being thrown into new challenges. Others benefit from the discipline of finding infinite depth in simple things. The common factor is the quality of engagement, not the specific content.
Let's bring this back to wisdom traditions more broadly. Because you mentioned several earlier, but I want to understand how they work together here.
Sure. So, what I find fascinating is how many traditions arrived at similar insights independently. The Zen emphasis on beginner's mind, the Socratic recognition that wisdom begins with acknowledging ignorance, the Christian instruction to become like children, the Taoist return to simplicity, the Sufi dying before death.
Are they saying the same thing?
Not exactly the same thing, but they're circling around something similar. They're all noticing that the accumulation of self, knowledge, identity, certainty creates a kind of calcification. And they're all offering practices for periodic dissolution,
Practices for unknowing.
practices for unknowing, though the methods differ enormously. Zen uses seated meditation and koans. Socrates used relentless questioning. The Sufis use ecstatic practice and poetry. The Taoists use wu wei, effortless action that releases the grip of the controlling self,
Different medicines for the same disease.
perhaps, or different aspects of a many-faceted jewel. The disease, if we call it that, is the tendency of consciousness to solidify around fixed positions. The cure involves some kind of softening, some kind of letting go, some kind of return to openness,
And different traditions emphasize different aspects of this return.
right? Some emphasize the cognitive dimension. Question your beliefs, examine your assumptions. Some emphasize the somatic dimension. Move differently, breathe differently, interrupt physical habits. Some emphasize the relational dimension. Receive teaching that shatters your categories. Some emphasize the devotional dimension. Surrender to something larger than your knowing self.
Mind, body, spirit, relationship.
All dimensions where beginner's mind can be cultivated. All doorways into the same openness. And I suspect the most complete approaches work with all of them. Not just thinking your way into not knowing, but embodying it, relating from it, surrendering into it.
That's quite comprehensive.
Transformation tends to be you can't just address one aspect and expect lasting change. The expert mind isn't just a cognitive phenomenon, it's held in the body, reinforced in relationships, defended by the ego. To truly recover beginner's mind, you have to work at multiple levels simultaneously.
Which is easier said than done.
Much easier said than done, and I think that's why these traditions developed systematic approaches. It's not enough to have the insight that beginner's mind is valuable. You need actual practices, sustained over time, that gradually loosen the grip of expertise and open you to fresh perception.
Long-term work.
Years of work. Daily work. Which is perhaps the final paradox. Becoming a beginner takes tremendous discipline. Suzuki trained for decades before he could articulate what beginner's mind meant. The Socratic method was the fruit of a lifetime of philosophical practice. This isn't casual insight, it's hard-won wisdom,
The expert in being a beginner.
if you want to put it that way. Though I think Suzuki would say there's no arriving at mastery here. The moment you think you've mastered beginner's mind, you've lost it. It's not a destination, it's a perpetual practice of returning.
You know, there's something in indigenous traditions that connects here too.
Pray tell.
The idea that nature is always teaching, that you can never be an expert on the forest, the river, the seasons. No matter how long you've lived with them, they always have something new to show you.
Because they're always changing.
And because they're infinitely complex, you can spend a lifetime observing one species of bird and never fully understand it. The elder who's watched for 60 years is still learning. That's genuine humility before reality.
It's also ecological wisdom. The moment you think you've mastered the natural world, you start making catastrophic mistakes. You don't see the second and third order effects of your interventions because your expertise has closed down your perception.
So, beginner's mind might actually be a survival trait.
In a changing world, absolutely. The expert who can't adapt is doomed. The beginner who stays open, who keeps learning, who doesn't assume yesterday's solutions work today, that's resilience.
Which brings us full circle. Suzuki Roshi wasn't just teaching meditation technique, he was offering a way of being in a world that's always new.
Always new, which our minds desperately want to deny. We create routines, categories, expectations precisely because we can't handle infinite novelty. But the cost of that coping mechanism is losing access to the aliveness that beginner's mind provides.
So it's a balancing act.
It's a lifetime practice of balancing. Categories when you need efficiency, openness when you need learning, the wisdom to know which is which, and the discipline to keep returning to openness even when expertise is so much more comfortable.
Always beginning.
Always beginning, which sounds frustrating until you realize it's also always fresh, always alive, always the first time. We have some listener messages this week that connect beautifully to what we've been discussing.
Let's hear them.
This first one is from Simon in Edinburgh. He writes, I keep thinking about your episode on the Oracle's paradox. Socrates said, I know that I know nothing, but then spent his entire life in philosophical inquiry. That seems contradictory to me. If wisdom means accepting your ignorance, why keep searching? And if you keep searching, aren't you hoping to eventually know something? I can't square these two things.
Oh, that's a sharp question. And the tension is real.
It is, but I think the tension is productive rather than contradictory. Socrates pursued wisdom precisely because he knew he didn't have it. The pursuit and the humility aren't opposites, they're partners.
Right. If you thought you already had wisdom, why would you seek it? The expert who believes they've arrived stops moving. Socrates never stopped moving because he never believed he'd arrived.
And here's the thing, Simon. Beginner's mind isn't anti-learning. It's about how you hold what you learn. You can accumulate tremendous understanding and still approach each new situation with openness. The question isn't whether you know things, it's whether your knowledge has become a cage.
The elenchus, Socrates' method of questioning, wasn't aimed at reaching final answers. It was perpetual inquiry. Every conclusion became a new starting point.
So, wanting to understand isn't the problem. Wanting to stop understanding, to arrive somewhere and plant your flag, that's when beginner's mind dies. Does that help with the tension?
I think it reframes it. The beginner seeks, the expert rests. Socrates was always seeking. That's what made him wise.
This next one is from Thomas in Berlin, and it builds on something similar. He writes, After your episode on Plato's cave, I started noticing how many of my own assumptions are just shadows on the wall. But here's what troubles me. Every time I think I've seen through one illusion, I seem to replace it with another framework. I escaped believing in materialism. Now I'm attached to idealism. I let go of one teacher's ideas, picked up another's. Is there any way out of this pattern? Or do we just keep trading one cave for another?
Love it. The meta trap is real, my friend.
It's completely real. And Thomas, you've identified something that a lot of spiritual teachings gloss over. Yes, any concept can become another thing to cling to, another cave wall to stare at.
I've seen people who are very attached to their non-attachment, very expert in their beginner's mind.
Which is absurd and also very human. So here's how I think about it. The cave isn't the categories themselves, it's our identification with them. It's mistaking the map for the territory.
So the freed prisoner in Plato's story doesn't escape into some category-free void. They return to the cave to help others. They're still working with shadows and light. They just hold them differently.
Exactly. The practice isn't building better caves or escaping caves forever. It's continuous loosening, noticing when you've calcified and softening again, over and over.
Suzuki Roshi said the moment you think you've achieved beginner's mind, you've lost it. The achievement itself is the trap.
So, maybe the answer to the meta trap is yes, you'll build new cages. That's what minds do. The practice is noticing when you're in one and being willing to step out again and again, not once and for all.
Perpetual escape rather than permanent liberation.
Which sounds exhausting until you realize it's also perpetual freshness. The willingness to keep beginning is itself the freedom.
Our last question comes from David in Sacramento. He writes, "Your Gilgamesh episode has stayed with me for weeks. He travels to the end of the world, survives impossible trials, finally gets the plant of immortality, and then loses it because he falls asleep. At first I thought it was just tragic, but now I'm wondering if there's something about his whole approach that was wrong from the start. He was so determined, so focused on his goal. Could that intensity itself have been the problem?"
David, this is a beautiful reading of the myth.
It really is. And I think you've touched on something important. Gilgamesh's entire quest is driven by expertise. He knows what he wants. He knows how to get it. He's relentless and focused and skilled.
And completely blind. Utnapishtim, the immortal sage, tries to give him wisdom, tells him stories, offers perspective, but Gilgamesh can't receive any of it because he's not there to learn. He's there to acquire.
The goal fixation is expert mind at its worst. He can't perceive the present moment because he's always reaching toward the future.
And then the serpent, which in ancient symbolism is transformation itself, the creature that sheds its skin and becomes new.
So the serpent takes the plant of immortality while Gilgamesh sleeps. The symbol of beginner's mind, of constant renewal, claims what the expert was too exhausted to protect.
There's something profound there. Gilgamesh falls asleep, his vigilance fails, and in that moment of unconsciousness, transformation slips away from him.
Because he couldn't stay present. He couldn't perceive freshly. He was dreaming of the future even in his sleep.
What you're pointing at, David, is that what we're seeking is often already present. Gilgamesh had encountered wisdom, had been given teachings, had found the plant, but he couldn't receive any of it because his expertise in seeking had closed him to finding.
The beginner finds because they're not looking for anything specific. The expert misses because they're looking only for what they expect.
Gilgamesh expected immortality to look a certain way. The wisdom right in front of him didn't match his categories, so he couldn't see it. Okay, thank you everyone who has sent us a message. We may not read them all out, but as you know, we do reply to all of them. Keep them coming.
Before we close, if you've been finding value in these conversations, there are simple ways to help more people discover them.
A review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify makes a real difference. Even just a rating takes seconds, but affects how the algorithms surface the show.
And the most powerful thing remains word of mouth. If you know someone who'd appreciate this kind of exploration, share an episode with them.
We don't do marketing campaigns. We have listeners who care enough to pass along what matters to them. We're grateful for that.
Well, that was quite a journey through not knowing.
Isn't it interesting how much there is to say about saying we don't know?
That's the paradox at the heart of it.
So here's what I'm wondering as we close. Where in your life are you most attached to your expertise? Where is your certainty potentially preventing you from seeing something important?
Those are good questions to sit with.
They are, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Where does beginner's mind show up for you? Where do you struggle with it? Send your reflections to podcast@maaoot.org.
Your experiences and questions genuinely shape these conversations.
They do, ab immemorabili, from time beyond memory.
Keep questioning.
Keep beginning
The wisdom you seek
has always been within you.